I can't emphasize enough how difficult it is for a unit to get through this obstacle belt from hell. It's among the toughest military operations that anybody can anticipate.
Greetings and salute, honored viewer. To right away start off with something fun, here's a short disclaimer. Any of potential following speculations have to be understood with the pretext of allegedly if referring to persons living or dead. Getting good information on the ongoing invasion of Ukraine is difficult, which makes drawing conclusions equally and even more difficult in likelihood and accuracy of outcome. Wars, as all things, are especially dynamic processes, and what starts as a glorious thunder run can suddenly turn into perplexed, personal opinion yet somewhat foreseeable, sinking into quicksand as 20 years in Afghanistan recently showed us. For those of you who happened to watch our subtitled video on Tactics vs Strategy, which is based on the English original by Digital Battlefield Tours, note the Easter egg question during the Amphibious Operations Taiwan spoiler cut-in scene from Discovery's Battle Plan series. A lot has been said and speculated before and during the ongoing Ukrainian counter-offensive, and although we are seeming to have high chances on another round of Schrödinger's Bakhmut again, overall the progress is made, and further to expect from both sides turning operational gains into consolidated holdings, let alone achieving something of strategic significance, remain little in our estimations. Basically a few days before, once again reports of a yet this time confirmed Ukrainian breakthrough in the southern theater came up, while just a day after reporting on Russian gains in the Luhansk region, which by the time of writing is not being covered, displayed by e.g. the Institute for the Study of War, leading to our last preamble. If one seeks information to make decisions or to inform one's opinion, then one should strive for all of the information and angles available, which is what we here are devoted to trying. Of course shaped by our own blind spots and limitations. Yet to close the introduction and start off the video,
our job is to collect facts right now, not form opinions.
Starting off with today's claim as you see on screen. One does not just travel through course 2.0. Regarding penetration as well as exploitation requires massive amounts of equipment, well and for offensive operations trained personnel, local numerical superiority in manpower, as well as especially in combined arms warfare, fire and reliable logistical support, as well as reinforcements, resupply available for all of them. While admittedly, the front is not a continuous well-manned line like Alps to the sea in World War I, it doesn't have to be. Russia's mobilizations have given it more flexibility in manning different lines differently qualified, dispersed what reserves it has left, to dig in and has so many note correctly, and Peter Zeihan puts it so eloquently, get beyond the obligatory first year of a conflict to once again let the oligarchy of the age figure out how to actually fight a war. Yet World War I did not have the merits of modern reconnaissance technology. Gathering attacks can be anticipated much earlier and geolocated much more efficiently and without too much delay, given one has his fire control chain figured out by now, which both sides seem to have achieved. While better communications and the fact that Russian forces on the lowest level have authority to call in artillery fire, every small delay can turn deadly within minutes. The Russians are applying what's called defense in depth, which correctly reminds many of World War I or especially the Battle of Kursk in World War II, which broke the German army's future offensive operational back, now enhanced by drone reconnaissance and the possibility to lay mines via artillery fire, which is especially effective and gruesome if you seal off beforehand cleared routes of advance for troops which now basically are trapped. I remember that exactly this situation personally troubled me deeply in the regarding class during one of the artillery support officers' lessons. When being presented with such a situation, I bluntly asked what a leader was supposed to do then, when being faced with driving into extended minefields during an advance, only having to realize your approachway was suddenly also being blocked by artillery deployed explosive obstacles, and every second the pre-planned conventional artillery at your location would be begin homing in. There was no definitive answer. Basically we were told to make our peace with a Kobayashi Maru scenario, sometimes you just can't win. Which leads to the only logical, not really a countermeasure option, which we are seeing displayed right now, hereby also answering History Legend's question he once asked regarding how to interpret this scene. You disperse and basically keep moving in the limited area you know to be safe, praying that by pure luck you can outmaneuver incoming fire for some minutes and that measures are being taken to break, combat engineer you out within minutes as well, hopefully having complete air supremacy, as well as Gepard, Mantis, you name it, very close, and in the end maybe at least some slight comfort knowing anyone firing at you will be taken out by immediate and accurate counter battery fire. Only that the Ukrainians have none of this in truly sufficient numbers. Not even sufficient amounts of artillery radars like the Abra or Cobra, which in conjunction with drones enable the attached artillery a truly 21st century ideal combat arms palette. A quick example for the matter of understaffing of critical equipment are reports which intend that Russia is by now using IG Shahed drones for reconnaissance by simply letting them loiter in area and find out where there is any air defense being present or able to engage it after some hours time to get nervous. Closing off, the West supplies enough to keep a war going, yet not to win it. Overall, the information war, we will be doing further episodes on, for example, Maskirovka, but especially try ourselves in an interpretation of even the already raging 5th generational warfare, makes it very hard to get a clear picture. So the Bradley parking spot and especially single losses alikes and the sensationalism or strike and destroy videos technically could be correctly described as very much overrated. Especially with, for the former, everything being shown from different angles to increase perception of several different events, encouraging self-perpetuating, deepening sensation cycles and subconscious comprehension, and creating a propaganda effect, further blurring an accurate cognition of basically any observer. Please note that it is just not possible to measure actual losses in wider scenario accurately on time, only compare and cut to the middle of varying claims. Decide Oryx, for example, is tracking equipment losses very diligently by optical confirmation, quite reliable, yet we will refrain from overall speculations of Ukraine's leftover potential in it and manpower, as especially regarding hit videos and often aftermath visuals, few people can say which equipment is a total loss, then again, which lost in offensive can be recovered. It is a highly fluid situation. For example, the Leopard getting hit by a Russian drone recently so proudly shown by the Russians only lost a spare parts compartment, which is why we will limit and focus on the following few examples and explain their possible implications. What we see here are the remains of a second wave of Ukrainian attack, which alone lost 3 Leopard 2R mine clearing vehicles, which accumulates in a loss of 50% of all equipment received of this special model. Losing the few modern mine clearing capabilities this early at this rate is devastating at this stage. Ukraine is simply under-equipped to clear such a defensive depth in a wider scale, especially in a time where mines can be redeployed by artillery fire and such resistant to conventional clearing methods, so-called blast-resistant mines, exist. On another occasion, Ukraine lost 70 Bradleys M2A2 ODSE of the overall 99 supplied to a brigade in just 2 days, which should give some perspective that an entirety of a brigade's modern IFV equipment could be burned through in under 2 weeks if attacks continued under similar conditions. Speculations how many troops have been committed so far are for naught, as we remember the basics of tactics versus strategy. Due to the overall depth of defenses, tactical successes might be possible, but strategic breakthroughs and consolidations are very unlikely with Ukraine's currently available sum of equipment. Further, the West mostly has been supplying APCs, armored personnel carriers, which alone cannot mount an offensive, while even their quality varies widely and often their armament is not sufficient, not even against artillery shrapnel, which recently even was confirmed for the French have supplied ATX-like tanks. Not to dive too deep into this during the special video, but Western militaries as well as suppliers basically have an ideal testing ground for current gear and tactics, and found much, especially of the latter, referring to force structure, standard operation procedures, as well as overall fighting power and supply, not even mentioning attached air defense, to be woefully inadequate to fight large-scale conventional wars against a near-peer opponent. While the flexible tactical brigade groups, for example, performed in pretty much a lightning war against likely armed militants in Mali, the APX-10 is not intended to play much more as a skirmishing, backward securing asset role in such a sort of conflict, as we see in Ukraine, as it has been retired behind front lines by the UFA after losses near Tokmachka. The fact that we have been seeing interesting combinations of company-sized attack elements consisting of a handful of APCs like Max Pros and 1 to 2 tanks is representative of the fact that Ukraine has not received enough Western equipment to raise even one coherent division-sized element, not even being able just to actually pool it in single wholly modern brigades and have in it unfold its patchwork potential in conjunction, while many likely armored vehicles like the M113 are rightfully used exclusively of battle taxis, circling infantry in and recovering wounded out, while even proper APCs are doing the same, as infantry fighting vehicles are what one needs in such a situation, not only APCs. This leaves Ukrainian infantry and rare modern armor and even fewer IFV support woefully under-supported and covered while clearing paths, let alone reaching and actually storming forward trenches. As already stated, individual videos and circumstances should not necessarily be used to make too meta picture conclusions, especially as Russia, as well as Ukraine, only to tend release what's favorable to their side of the narrative, if they can control it. Yet, if incidents start repeating themselves, we allow ourselves to draw some hints of pattern emergence, as we can overwatch a similar scenario widely over the width of the Ukrainian counteroffensive. First, Ukrainians are not making significant gains. Two whole company-sized elements are repeatedly getting stuck and lose significant amounts of equipment. 3. While the absence of air cover should be somewhat self-explanatory, the lack of supporting recon and surveillance assets in form of drones, as well as, for example, electronic warfare support, seem to be obvious as well. Among other things, it has been repeatedly noted in intelligence circles that Russian aviation support played a major role in denying possible successful Ukrainian advances. Note, we are not saying that we do not understand that Ukraine is short on everything and has surely, for example, much more desirable to defending areas and troops than it has sufficiently mobile air defense and electronic warfare capabilities, not even speaking of its depleting supply in e.g. S-300 munitions. All we are noting is what we already established. If such operations are not being provided with the necessary assets, at least temporarily, while the campaign is ongoing, the outcome has been foreseeable. To give some examples, please note for yourself how these Ukrainian columns are being surveilled once by a drone, which could be used to feed live positioning data to home and artillery right away, and the latter we see through the camera of a Ka-52 Alligator, which is picking up the Ukrainian vehicles in all peace of mind by handbook one after another. We are aware that this only displays one side of the conflict, and as said, well are aware the very biased view, cherry picking, but we actually have indications of our claims at least having some merit confirmation by Sergeant Major Valery Marcos of the 47th NATO-trained Mechanized Brigade.
Shit, dude, that's a tough position to be in, and he's maintaining his cool very well.
Which, if the audience allows, one could refer to as the Ukrainian NATO Pioneer military unit, as it not only was accordingly trained and staffed with regardingly educated young officers, but also received a bulk of Western equipment like infantry fighting vehicles Bradley, capable American Paladin self-propelled howitzers, obviously it's a Panzerhaubitze, it has Panzers, and other things that one would like to see vanished from this plane of existence, and probably somewhat capable kampfwertgesteigerte M55S tanks. On July 11th, the Sergeant Major of the 47th Brigade met with the President of Ukraine to complain about the decisions of the unit's command that had resulted in heavy losses in the unit's personnel and material during the failed attacks in the Malatokmachka-Robotine axis. The meeting took place after Marcos had lashed out on his Telegram channel against Brigade Commander and his Deputy Commander, whom Marcos called a moral degenerate. Further, he had asked to be demoted to a lower position, saying he disagreed with decisions made regarding the deployment and development of the 47th Brigade and the competence of the officer corps. Sadly, NATO's intent of also staffing the brigade with younger, non-Soviet but Western-trained officers did not pay off. At least that's what Marcos implies. Very recently leaked assessment details of the counter-offensive by the German military seem to confirm his claims as well as our speculations, as quote, NATO training is being wasted, with a tendency on the Ukrainian side to promote combat veterans and not Western trained officers to leaders, therefore probably jeopardizing many efforts regarding moving on from post-Soviet yet still seemingly very command-driven leadership, with little higher education of one's role in achieving objectives in the grand stratagem. Rather than the former mission command, mission type tactics, leadership by mission, German Auftragstaktik, while yes, dear American colleagues, comrades, brothers, I am well aware we cannot claim its invention, which when paired with, for example, German after Napoleon adjustments to train everyone to function above his own rank, to on the one side be able to grow forces quickly if need be, as well as to be able to understand the former mentioned own role, wesentliche Leistung, in the higher-ups' intentions, can work out exceedingly well. Promotion on the battlefield might be practical, yet not in a fairly unevenly trained and backgrounded force on the level of staff officer ranks. As at least one counterpoint in the Ukrainians versus Germans merit, in my personal Ukraine-associated circles, including occasional updates right from the fronts, complaints about the German unrealistic schooling using neatly maximum few hundred meters sized and handsomely shaped minefields came up repeatedly. Summarizing, we would like dare to say, the map speaks for itself. Possibly also the massive losses in experienced troops in places like Bakhmut, to then also utilize rather badly, not accordingly offensive trained territorial defense units for operations are definitely hampering Ukrainian efforts as well. Another thesis, Ukraine might possibly rightfully feel it needs to be appearing to win, otherwise Western support might dry out. One there could speculate that political strategic pressure partly drove the offensive start. Just to elaborate in an additional note, the sound move could rather have been to attack later this year, to capitalize a window of some weeks before the start of Rasputitsa, to prevent the enemy from retaking territory, being then hindered by highly impeded overall mobility, re-restricted to roads, being easier to repel and having months more time to consolidate gains. One needs to get comfortable with the realization that the conflict might drag on for very long, because even if the loss rates continue similarly, in regards to population sizes, both countries could drag the conflict out many more years to come. Further restrictions for Ukraine as not being able to destroy Russian war-related industry, as well as international unwillingness to strengthen measures preventing deliveries from its partners and even the EU, until a whistleblower and German news agency Spiegel TV raised awareness of regarding supplies of ammunition production factories to Serbia, like Shahed drones from Iran, further ensure the non-evenly leveling of the battlefield in the foreseeable future. Especially because of Ukraine's lack of measures taken to establish a domestic war industry in key areas as middle-range missiles building, which admittedly is a detail of technologic capability I can't answer for itself. It now lacks adequate strategic options, while, personal opinion, could having been well aware conflict was coming. The lack of foresight, willing to strategically commit, or other shortcomings by leadership is once again being paid by subordinates and dependents on the sharp end. Regarding the direly needed artillery munition supplies, goals were formulated by the Poroshenko administration, but to quote Comrade Perun, money was spent but no shells were produced. As for example, the head of major Ukrainian state armament supplier Ukro has been let go very recently. One could thereafter all speak of an unevenly committed or even ununified West, except for in verbal outrage. While Rheinmetall is intending to invest 200 million euros in a local armaments factory, in conjunction with Ukro, there are no signs of further Western countries giving, for example, ammo suppliers binding guarantees. Such investments are gambles with high starting costs which amortize only if a war keeps going, especially if we would take a direly needed artillery shells factory as example. While rather being able to use possible overproduction in case of peace to fill up national stockpiles again, all such has to be guaranteed by stage, and such negotiations take their time, which is why the Rheinmetall's case performance should be monitored with patient curiosity. Note regarding the word game changer. To be for once bluntly honest, I'm quite annoyed by misuse of terms in general and sensational nonsense in an age of ever more clickbait-driven economy, yet the question, could this be another game changer, has been used this inflationary that I believe even the last civilian media user has by now figured out this term ranges in the same practicality versus marketing category like Wunderwaffe. The same reservations we advise for the term total war, and yes, I am loosely stealing this one from Max Brooks, that one can sleep for the Endsieg, one might be able to convince me. But the latest you go to the restroom, this pretension of being able to commit all citizens every moment towards one goal is just ridiculous in practicality and should be noted as a red flag in various directions for you when uttered by someone. If something like a focus, Schwerpunkt, had to be made on my account, I would once again side with Polish Aussie colleague Perun, namely that we see that consolidation per barrage seems to become grinding successful status quo tactics of the day. Therefore, if someone would like to help, the until now carefully vanilla flavored aid packages would be needed to be stacked up with much more artillery assets and munitions. Ukraine has proven it very well understands how to hinder Russia's operational capability by utilizing its advantage in range by HIMARS for destroying Russian munition depots, means of command and control, etc. Yet while this forces Russian troops to draw out their supply lines and definitely hinders on a tactical level, which can be exploited like in Kharkiv, while lack of readiness like absence of any guards, as experienced by German volunteer Jonas Kratzenberg and as he tells in his book Schützenhilfe. Sadly, there are publishing issues which drag out a publication in English, but if you would like a recension, as which we are planning to introduce the German audience more to for example Peter Zeihan, please let us know in the comments. Concluding, Strategically, it means very little as long as the streams of supplies are still functional, running and even partly expanding. Some might argue it might bear bigger escalation potential, yet Ukraine already has struck the Russian homeland, and although we heard many threats and many non as well as professional news sources love to jump on this bandwagon, a future video of ours will discover why the actual slamming of the nuclear button is highly unlikely, while there are recent implications that Russia and the US, or at least the latter, could be aiming for another diplomatic solution attempt once more. According to US foreign policy heavyweight and strategist Edward Luttwak, a certain point of stabilizing of the front might have been reached, which could enable the US to broker a lose-lose, yet after all peace.
There's much more than a shift in tone. There is a shift in the overall situation. First, the Ukrainians launched their all-out offensive and they encountered the new Russian army. Fight the Russians, win the first year because the second they get stronger. The second thing is that President Biden made the clear decision that Ukraine shall not be invited to join NATO. Why is that? Because the United States wants this war to end.
So to start with the Americans, what you're saying is you think they are looking for peace at this point, and the signal has changed, and it looks like they are preparing the ground for some kind of negotiation. Do I understand you correctly?
Yes, because the United States government wants out of this war. But on the upper level, clearly the priority now is not to defend Kiev, because Kiev is not in danger. The priority is to stop this war.
And you think President Biden is on board with that?
Absolutely is on board with that, and that's why he didn't want Ukraine to join NATO. There was always some amount of caution, but now there's something else. That something else is that the fighting is stabilized. The profile of how to get out of this war is very clear, and that profile is that the Russians withdraw from all parts of Ukraine other than the two regions they claimed all along, the oblasts, or oblin, whatever the Ukrainian term for them, of Donetsk and Luhansk. The only way out of this war is to have plebiscites in these two regions, where you ask people, do you want to be with Russia or with Ukraine?
Is this an Edward Luttwak plan, or is this something you've heard discussed? Do you think it's feasible? Do you think other people are talking about it?
No, this is it happens to be the plan that I've been writing about all along, but there happens to be no other plan. The plan of holding plebiscites may be a most ridiculous plan, but there's no other plan. Once Ukraine gives up Crimea, accepts these terms, Ukraine can enter NATO. That's the big payoff. That's why you don't give it to them for free. Why all this? Because Washington is watching China. And China is boiling.
I want to come on to China, but just before we do that, do you think this will actually happen? Is this your idea of what should happen, or do you think it will happen?
One is that it will happen, exactly as I said. The other is that it won't. And if it won't, we are looking at a 7 years war, if we're lucky. It could be a 25-year war.
Although we personally think is still unlikely, as we will elaborate in the closing remarks. Yet Russia, at least if looking for a peace, is bluffing very well momentarily, raising its mobilization ages for reservists and undertaking various other steps to fully commit to a longer drawn-out war, as well as seemingly cracking down on the outside very pro-war persons which allegedly are part of a yet peace-seeking nationalist associated faction. As said, dear viewer, it is an information war, and regarding ongoing topics like these, we tend to gather information first and then make assumptions and reports. Colonel Reisner of the Austrian Military Academy drew further parallels to World War I by comparing the timeline where we now, compared to 1916, as well are at the point where both sides realize it will not be over quick and that it will become only more awfully painful. Complementing, I would like to draw the question if the summer offensives for our age could possibly either become the Battle of Verdun or rather on the Somme. A referendum would have to be held under inclusion of all citizens of Ukraine technically, in a perfect world including all refugees abroad voting for their original oblasts. Ensuring such takes place in a fair way and would be accepted by each side's nationalists. Let's summarize, that the likeliness of peace dealers not having much to worry from their own populations is rather slim, and as we will once again mention in one of our coming series on the Russian army's failings in the first phase of the war, if confronted with regime stability or war practicality, history shows us a tendency that most leaders seem to display a quite egoistic and outrageous habit of having a desire to stay alive themselves, which we will discover in a further future series. It is not your fault, on the nature of perception and movements. #nature versus nurture versus zeitgeist. If you enjoyed the video and would be interested in, for example, an interview with the commander of the German Special Forces Training Center, please leave us a like, ring the bell and let us know in the comments. This was our first episode in our Russo-Ukraine current and foreseeable conflict meta-series. We thank you for your attention. This concludes my elaborations.